They say you never forget the smell of war. I don't know if that's true for everyone, but for me it clings like damp earth, rusted metal, and something burnt that shouldn't be. My name's Joe. Just Joe. Ordinary guy, drafted from Indiana, thrown into Europe with a rifle and a prayer. And this is the story of just another day, the 26th of July, 1944, deep in the hedgerows of Normandy. We've been pushing forward for weeks, each morning starting the same, a cold shiver before dawn, boots still damp from the day before, and a whisper of wind that never quite cut through the tension in our chests. Normandy wasn't flat like we imagined. It was a patchwork of tight country roads, ancient stone houses, and hedgerows, those damned hedgerows. They weren't just bushes. They were walls of tangled roots and earth, built up over centuries. You couldn't see beyond them, and the Krauts knew that. They were waiting, always waiting. We were tasked with pushing towards St. Lo, a quiet town turned battlefield, reduced to rubble by the time we got close. On the 26th, our orders were simple on paper: move through the village of La Mauve, secure the main road, and link up with the armored column south of there. But nothing in Normandy was ever simple. That morning, the sky was a strange shade of blue-gray. It felt heavy, like the world itself was holding its breath. We were huddled behind a low stone wall, about 5 of us from Charlie Company. Corporal Ramirez was checking his map again, even though he'd memorized it. Next to him, Smitty from New Jersey was fiddling with his bayonet, muttering something about his girl back home. We all had our pre-battle rituals. Me? I just stared at my boots, counted the laces, anything to keep from thinking. The signal came, a short whistle from up the line. We moved, through broken fences, past craters that still steamed from yesterday's artillery, into another nameless French farm. The barn was half collapsed, chickens scattered, feathers floating like ash. There was a lull, maybe 30 seconds where nothing moved. I remember that silence more than anything. It was never truly quiet, but it felt like it. And then hell cracked open. The first shot missed us. The second didn't. Machine gun fire tore through the corner of the barn. We dropped instantly, hitting the dirt like rag dolls. Dust and with splinters filled the air. Ramirez cursed, rolled to the left, and started shouting coordinates. I barely heard him. My ears were ringing, my fingers numb. Smitty crawled forward, low and fast, trying to spot the shooter. He didn't get far. There was no scream, just a thud. He was gone. The world narrowed. One hedgerow, one wall, one field. That was it. Nothing else mattered. We laid down fire, short bursts, mostly blind. The enemy was dug in, probably a machine gun nest with overlapping arcs. Classic German defense. Smart, efficient, deadly. I don't remember deciding to move. My legs did it before my brain. I flanked right, keeping low, heart pounding loud enough to drown out the shots. Crawled through a muddy trench, past what I think used to be a scarecrow. Somewhere in the distance, tank fired, a deep, thunderous boom that shook the earth beneath me. I found a break in the hedgerow. It led to a small farmhouse, barely standing. The windows were shattered, door hanging loose, roof scorched. Then inside, movement. I didn't think. I charged. The doorway exploded inward as I kicked it. Inside were 2 Germans, kids, no older than me. One reached for his weapon, the other froze. I hesitated, and in that second, I saw it, not fear, not hatred, just exhaustion. Like we were all just done with this madness. But the moment passed. I raised my rifle. Only one walked out. The house was clear, but the street beyond wasn't. I could hear the firefight still raging. Ramirez was calling it a mortar strike, but the radio crackled with static. Our left flank was exposed. Reinforcements were delayed, and something was moving in the smoke, something big. I ducked behind the doorway, breathing heavy. My hands were shaking. I looked down and realized I'd been hit. Nothing serious, just shrapnel in the leg. But it burned like fire. I wrapped it quickly, biting down on my glove to muffle the pain. That's when I saw it. Across the courtyard, through the smoke and rubble, stood a figure. Not in uniform. Not holding a weapon. Just standing, still, watching. It was a woman. French, maybe. Or maybe not. She wore a faded blue dress, torn and stained. Her face was blank, unreadable, and her eyes, they didn't blink. I called out, but she didn't move. And then, like a mirage, she was gone. No sound, no footprints, just gone. Maybe it was the blood loss. Maybe I was seeing ghosts. God knows this place had enough of them. But I knew I couldn't stay. The others needed cover, and that machine gun nest wasn't going to stop itself. I grabbed a grenade from my belt, checked the pin twice, and slipped back out the rear of the house. The alley was narrow, choked with weeds and broken bricks. I hugged the wall, inching forward, step by agonizing step. The nest was close now. I could hear the German crew yelling to one another, their voices sharp, frantic. They didn't know I was there. Not yet. I pulled the pin. The seconds stretched. 1, 2, 3, and then I threw. The explosion lit up the alley in a flash of fire and steel. The sound was deafening. Screams followed. I didn't wait to hear the end of them. I stormed the position. Smoke everywhere. Bodies too. One gunner was still moving, trying to reach for his sidearm. I kicked it away, stared at him. He stared back. Neither of us said a word. He didn't resist. I didn't shoot. By the time the rest of Charlie Company caught up, the nest was ours. The road to St. Lo was one step closer to open. But the price. Smitty was gone. So was Dawkins. And Ramsey had taken a round to the shoulder. We regrouped in the shadow of that broken farmhouse. The sun was higher now, but it didn't feel warm. Just harsh. Unforgiving. Ramirez lit a cigarette with shaking fingers, passed it around. We didn't talk. What was there to say? Then I looked back, toward the field, the hedgerow, the place where I'd seen her. She was standing there again, still, watching. And just like before, she vanished. Some things, I guess, aren't meant to be understood. But we had our orders. St. Lo still waited. And this war, this damned war, was far from over. They say every man carries his own ghost through war, but no one ever tells you they might start showing up before you're even dead. The rest of that day blurred into a rhythm of motion and noise that never quite let up. Sweat mixing with dirt, orders barked over gunfire, the dull ache in my leg pulsing in time with my heartbeat. We kept pushing, moving from one shattered wall to the next, house by house, field by field. The Germans didn't run, not here. They made us fight for every brick, every corner, every stretch of scorched earth that we could barely call progress. And all the while, in the back of my mind, like a film reel skipping over itself, I saw her again. Those eyes quiet and wide, full of something I couldn't name. I didn't tell the others. What could I have said? Hey fellas, I'm seeing ghosts now. Pass me another clip? Not in this war. Not with men dropping like flies, each day narrowing the number of voices in our company. By mid-afternoon, we reached a junction, a fork in a battered rural road where an old stone chapel had stood, now just a jagged silhouette against the overcast sky. The bell tower had collapsed inward, crushing half the nave beneath ancient timbers and stone that looked like it had been plucked from another century. That place reeked of the past, and not just from the dust and mildew. It had presence. Maybe it was the silence surrounding it, or the way no birds dared settle on the debris. Ramirez called it a defensible checkpoint, and we set up there for the night. What was left of Charlie Company, barely 19 of us, fortified the ruins as best we could. The engineers had promised a tank column would roll in by morning, but that promise felt as real as the ones I made to my mother in my last letter. Hopeful, well-meant lies. As we hunkered down, I kept glancing toward the rear of the chapel, where the apse had partially collapsed. There was an archway still intact, and beyond it, a stairwell leading downward. No one else seemed to notice it, or maybe they were just too exhausted to care. But it pulled at me. Not in a curious way, not like a kid drawn to adventure, but in the way an old scar itches before a storm. I couldn't let it go. So sometime after midnight, when most of the guys were asleep and the watch had rotated, I slipped away from the fire and crept back toward that archway. My boots crunched over broken glass and splinters as I approached, and I had to hold my breath, part from the smoke of the earlier firefight still lingering in the air, part from instinct. I reached the stairwell and stood there looking down. The darkness was thick, complete, but it didn't feel empty. It felt like standing at the edge of a memory I didn't own. I didn't have a flashlight, just a Zippo and the guts to flick it on. The flame danced and hissed, and I started down, one step at a time, the walls growing colder the deeper I went. The room at the bottom was small, barely wide enough for 3 men across, but the walls, those told stories. Scorched black in places, etched with symbols I didn't recognize. There were bones, too. Not fresh, ancient, buried in the dust and rubble like a long-forgotten warning. And in the far corner, a rusted iron gate hung ajar. It led to what looked like a crypt, but I couldn't be sure. Something about the air changed as I approached. It grew heavier, almost electric, like a thunderstorm about to break. My breath fogged in front of me, despite the summer heat upstairs. And then I saw it, carved into the wall behind the gate, a single name, worn but legible. Claire. I didn't move, didn't speak. Just stood there, gripping my rifle tighter than I needed to. I don't know how long I stayed like that. Maybe minutes, maybe longer. But eventually, the cold lifted, and I turned back, climbing out of that place with a pounding heart and the taste of iron in my mouth. When I returned to the fire, Ramirez shot me a look but didn't ask. He was smoking again, eyes sunken, face drawn tighter than I'd ever seen it. He looked like a man already halfway buried. I told myself I'd imagined it all, the name, the chill, the pull of that place. I had to. The next morning came fast, ushered in by the thunder of tank tracks grinding up the hill toward us. Dust and diesel filled the air as the Sherman column emerged from the tree line, 24 strong, bristling with fresh armor and optimism. Their commander, a lanky Texan with a grin too wide for the war around him, gave us a quick briefing. We'd roll with them into the outskirts of St. Lo, clean out any resistance, and dig in until further orders. Easy, he said, like Sunday morning. Only problem was, nothing in Normandy ever went easy. We advanced in formation, tanks fanning out across the road and fields, infantry trailing along the flanks. The terrain changed quickly, hedgerows giving way to open stretches of farmland pockmarked with craters and the occasional burnt-out vehicle. Every few minutes, the ground beneath us would shake as one of the tanks fired off a round into suspected cover. Most times, there was no response. But sometimes, the hedgerows bit back. Halfway down a sunken road just north of St. Lo, the lead Sherman took a hit. The explosion was instant, turning the tank into a fireball that lit up the mid-morning gloom. Screams followed. We scattered for cover, diving into ditches, hugging the walls of half-demolished barns. The ambush was coordinated, German 88mm guns, dug in on high ground, flanked by infantry with Panzerfausts. It was a kill zone, and we were stuck in the middle of it. What followed was chaos. Our tanks returned fire, carving craters into the hillside, but the Germans had the angle. We tried to flank, but every route felt like it was being watched. The dirt kicked up around me in sharp, violent bursts as machine gun tracers sliced through the air. I crawled behind a tractor wheel, breathing hard, trying to spot an opening. That's when I saw him, Dawkins, or what was left of him. Sprawled out in the road, one arm stretched toward us like he'd been reaching for help. No one could get to him. Not without dying, too. And in that moment, when death was spinning in the air like a coin waiting to land, I glanced up toward the ridge and saw her again. Claire. Standing among the smoke and fire, her blue dress flickering like a candle's last breath. She wasn't running, wasn't hiding, just watching, like she'd been waiting for us to come. And then she moved. Not away, but toward the ridge, right into the line of fire. I shouted. No one heard. And just like that, the guns went silent. There are moments in war when everything freezes, not literally, but in your mind. The way it happens in dreams, you don't realize are dreams until you've woken up drenched in sweat and unable to breathe. That moment, when the ridge fell into silence, was one of them. The sound of gunfire didn't fade so much as vanish, as though someone had turned a dial and severed us from reality. Smoke still curled through the trees, the engine of a half-destroyed Sherman still sputtered and whined, and yet the battlefield itself, just moments ago a pulsing, screaming thing, had gone impossibly quiet. And in that impossible silence, she stood on the hilltop, not hidden behind stone or shrub, not crouched or cowering, but standing tall, hands by her sides, face unreadable. Claire. No one else seemed to see her, or if they did, their eyes refused to believe. A few of the guys were staring up toward the ridge, blinking hard like they couldn't trust what was in front of them. Others were already on their feet, rushing to reposition, assuming the enemy had retreated or run dry. But I didn't move. I couldn't. Not until she took a single step forward, and then another, and disappeared once again, this time behind a tall oak at the crest of the hill, her figure swallowed by leaves and shadow. The gunfire didn't return. The enemy didn't shoot again. It was as if she'd taken the violence with her. Ramirez approached me from the left, covered in grime and breathing hard, a fresh cut across his cheek oozing down his neck like a slow trickle of ink. He crouched behind the same ruined wall I was using for cover and asked if I was all right. I nodded, unable to form real words. He didn't press further. Maybe he saw the look in my eyes. Maybe he had it too. He pulled out the map again, now torn in the corners, dotted with ash and a blood smear none of us bothered to identify, and laid it across the stone between us. We were supposed to move east, into the ruins of an estate that intelligence believed had been converted into a German command post. The armor would hold the crossroads while we cleared the high ground, house by house if needed. Ramirez said it like it was just another job, but we both knew the chances of making it through without losing half of what was left of Charlie Company were slim. Still, orders were orders, and if we didn't take that hill, the entire southern flank of the St. Lo advance could buckle. We regrouped beneath a canopy of dying trees, their trunks scored with shrapnel wounds, their leaves curling inward as if recoiling from what they'd seen. The men were tired, beyond tired, their faces hollowed into mask-like versions of the boys they'd once been. Some tried cracking jokes, forced things dry and jagged, but the laughter didn't rise far before falling flat. Most just checked their gear, rewrapped old wounds, or stared into the distance like they were trying to see past the war itself. I didn't speak. I just kept seeing her, Claire, walking into gunfire that never touched her, watched by men too broken to question what they'd seen. We began the ascent in a staggered line, stepping carefully over branches and broken helmets, the air charged with something that felt like electricity but wasn't. I remember hearing the wind whistle through the grass in a pattern that almost sounded like a tune, like a lullaby half forgotten. There was a barn near the top of the ridge, ancient, leaning slightly to one side like it had never quite recovered from the last war. Inside, the floor had collapsed in two places, and scorch marks blackened the beams above the hayloft. What was left of the German defense had holed up there, along with a few snipers who had used the barn's upper window as a vantage point to watch the valley. They were gone now, either fled or worse, but the silence they left behind felt heavier than gunfire. Ramirez and I took the west entrance while Curtis and Delaney circled to the back. We moved slow, weapons raised, boots soft on the dirt. The smell inside was something old, mold and rot, and the copper tang of dried blood. I swept left, Ramirez, right? A single beam of light filtered through a hole in the roof, catching dust motes in its path like slow-moving fireflies. In the middle of the room was something strange, a circle burned into the ground, not large, maybe 5 feet across. Around it were markings, not German, not French, but older. Carved or branded into the wood, symbols like the ones I'd seen in the crypt beneath the chapel, symbols that twisted if you stared too long, their edges seeming to shift just slightly, just enough to make your skin itch. Ramirez didn't see it. His focus was on clearing the hayloft, but I stood there frozen, staring at that circle, and then at the center of it, pendant, metal and blackened, lying like an offering. I reached for it, slow and hesitant, and the moment my fingers brushed its edge, the wind outside shifted. It wasn't louder. It was colder, sharper, like it had teeth. Ramirez called out then, something about movement beyond the ridge. I snapped out of it, shoved the pendant into my pocket, and followed him out. He was pointing toward a narrow trail that led down the far side of the hill, where an orchard had once stood but now lay twisted and broken, trees torn apart by shells and fire. Figures were moving through it, not quickly, not in any organized way. Civilians maybe, or retreating Germans. It was hard to tell from the distance. We decided to pursue. If they were enemy, they needed to be dealt with. If they were villagers, they needed protection. Either way, we had to go. We reached the orchard in minutes, and what we found there didn't make sense. There were people, yes, 6 perhaps, but they didn't react to our presence. Didn't flinch at the sound of boots, didn't raise their hands or call out for help. They were dressed in old clothes, frayed and stained, not military, not civilian, not really anything you could place. One woman held a bundle of fabric to her chest, rocking it gently, though it was clearly empty. Another man, barefoot and wide-eyed, stared at a tree as though it were speaking to him. And in the center of the grove, beneath the largest tree whose trunk had split from a direct shell hit, stood Claire. She looked exactly the same. Not a scratch, not a speck of dust. Her dress still blue, her eyes still fixed on me. And this time, when she turned, she beckoned. I didn't wait. I moved forward, heart pounding harder with every step. Ramirez shouted after me, but his voice was far away, like I was walking underwater. The orchard faded behind me. The sky darkened. I followed her through a break in the trees, into a clearing I hadn't seen on the map. And in that clearing, surrounded by stones older than any war, she stopped. She raised her hand, and she pointed to the ground. And that's where I saw it. My name, carved deep into the stone. There are some things that can't be explained, only experienced. And standing there in that clearing hidden deep within the scarred land of Normandy, I knew I'd crossed into a part of the war that didn't follow orders or battle maps. This wasn't the kind of place you wrote home about. This was older than the rifle in my hands, older than the uniforms we wore or the tanks that rolled through villages like steel beasts in search of their own ghosts. This clearing had waited, and now I stood in it, staring at a slab of stone so weathered by time it seemed more a memory than an object. Its surface cracked and darkened, yet the inscription etched into it was unmistakable. My name, Joseph B. Tanner, in full first, middle, last, cut deep, as if the blade had known me. No rank, no date, just the name, and beneath it, something stranger still, a phrase in a language I didn't recognize, curved beneath the letters like the shadow of a smile. I didn't breathe. I couldn't. It was as if the air itself had turned to glass, fragile, and all around me, waiting to shatter. Claire didn't move. She stood beside the stone, not touching it, not even looking at it anymore. Her gaze was fixed on me, steady, full of something that wasn't sympathy, wasn't sadness, but wasn't cold either. It was knowing, and that knowing felt like weight pressed onto my chest. Behind me, the war was still there. Ramirez was shouting again, though the words were indistinct, muffled as if spoken through water or smoke. I turned toward the sound, and for the briefest moment, I saw the orchard as it had once been, unscarred, green, children playing beneath the branches, a woman hanging linens on a line strung between two trees. There was laughter, wind in the leaves, the smell of bread, of life. But it vanished as quickly as it came, replaced once more by the burned remains and the strange, silent figures that now haunted its ruins. I stumbled back a step, hands still on my rifle, heart beating too fast for comfort. Claire's eyes followed my movement, but she didn't come any closer. I wanted to ask her who she was, what she was, but the words refused to form. It felt wrong to speak them aloud here, like breaking some unspoken pact. The clearing was sacred, not in the religious sense, but in the way cemeteries are sacred even to men who've long stopped praying. And I understood, without being told, that this place didn't take kindly to questions. It offered only what it chose, and it never repeated itself. Then the ground trembled, just slightly, a pulse, like the land itself had drawn breath. A low rumble followed, far off but growing. Not thunder, not tanks. Something deeper, like the echo of a sound too old to have a source. Claire turned away, finally, and walked behind the stone, disappearing into the tree lean without a glance back. I should have followed her, but instead I stood there rooted until Ramirez broke through the trees behind me, panting, his rifle up, eyes wide with panic. He stopped cold when he saw the stone. "What the hell is this place?" he asked, and for the first time in days, his voice wasn't laced with sarcasm or steel. It was small, quiet, like he was afraid something might answer. I didn't know what to tell him. So I said the only thing I could: "We need to leave." We made our way back through the orchard, through the remnants of that surreal moment, and by the time we rejoined the rest of the company, the ridge was quiet again. The strange civilians were gone, though no one had seen them leave. Delaney said he thought he saw someone vanish right into the trees, like smoke blown sideways. No one questioned it. We'd seen too much. Questioning only made it worse. Later that evening, we dug in along a line of shattered walls just beyond the high ground, overlooking what used to be a vineyard. The terrain ahead rolled gently toward the edge of St. Lo, the city still smoldering in patches, buildings collapsed inward like broken teeth, the streets invisible beneath rubble and ruin. We were so close now, just days away from cracking through the last of German resistance in the region. Reinforcements were rumored to be moving in from the west, and command believed we might actually hold our position long enough to regroup. It should have been encouraging, but morale was low. lower than I'd ever seen it. Curtis, who once swore he'd take Berlin on foot if he had to, didn't speak. Just sat sharpening a blade that had long since lost its edge. Ramirez smoked constantly now, not even looking at the cigarettes, just lighting one from the other and staring into the dusk like he was waiting for something he couldn't name. As night fell, the fog rolled in, a thick, low mist that crept between the ruins like it belonged there. Visibility dropped to nothing in a matter of minutes. The kind of fog you feel more than see. It clung to your skin, crawled into your boots, soaked through your coat no matter how tight you wrapped it. Delaney said it was unnatural. Swore he'd grown up in the fog back in Maine, but never saw anything like this. He kept muttering about the orchard, about the woman, about names carved in stone. I didn't tell them I'd taken the pendant from the barn. It sat in my breast pocket, heavy in a way that metal shouldn't be, cold even through the fabric. I thought about throwing it away more than once, but every time I reached for it, something stopped me. Not fear, not exactly. More like recognition. As if the thing knew me. As if it had always known me. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not really. I drifted in and out, my dreams thick with shifting faces, with sounds that didn't belong to the world I knew. Boots crunching on gravel, the creak of a door slowly swinging open, the whisper of a woman's voice speaking in a language I didn't understand but somehow remembered. When I finally sat up, the fog hadn't lifted. The fire had gone out. The sky was a pale, sick color, like the sun had forgotten how to rise. And standing at the edge of camp, half hidden in the mist, was Claire. She didn't wave. She didn't speak. She just stood there, one hand outstretched, palm up, waiting. I rose slowly, not grabbing my rifle. I didn't need it. I moved toward her, steps soft, careful, unsure if I was awake. Behind me, I heard Ramirez stir, mutter something in his sleep. I didn't look back. I couldn't. When I reached her, she turned without a word, and I followed her once more, past the broken walls, past the ridge, back toward the orchard that should not have been there anymore. And this time, when I reached the clearing, I saw more than one name on the stone. I saw all of ours. It's one thing to see your own name carved in stone, to feel the chill of premonition settle into your bones like an old, familiar ache. But it's another entirely to see all the names, every last man from Charlie Company, etched into that cold slab like a ledger of the dead, waiting to be checked off by a hand that never trembled. There they were, row after row, not in order of rank or alphabet, but grouped the way we fought, fire teams, squads, the way we used to line up in formation before the bullets started flying and everything turned to smoke and fragments. I stood there, heart pounding like a drum left out in the rain, watching the mist roll over those letters, making them shimmer and blur like tears that hadn't yet fallen. Claire didn't speak. She didn't have to. Her silence said enough. It said we were already ghosts, walking a line so thin and frayed it barely held beneath our boots. It said we'd crossed something invisible days ago, maybe weeks, and now the war wasn't just about territory or tactics, but something deeper, something old, hungry, and patient. She walked slowly along the edge of the clearing, her steps deliberate, almost ceremonial, like she was guiding me through a place with rules I didn't understand, where every sound echoed with memory and every shadow waited to tell its story. I followed because I had to, because some part of me knew this was the only way forward, even if it led through the very heart of something I didn't believe in until I stood face to face with it. The mist thickened as we moved, muffling the world until even my own breath felt distant, disconnected. We passed a half-buried bell, cracked down the middle, green with age, and I swore I heard it hum as we stepped by. The trees bent slightly toward us, not from wind, there was none, but as if they were listening, leaning in to catch a word that hadn't yet been spoken. Claire finally stopped near a low mound of earth, covered in moss and bramble, no markings except a small iron cross rusted almost black. She knelt, placed her hand on the ground, and looked up at me. Not a plea, not a command, just a gaze so full of time that it emptied me out, left nothing but questions and the echo of a heartbeat that might not have been mine. And then I remembered. Not in the way you recall a birthday or a place you once lived, but like a photograph rising from the depths of water, blurry at first, then suddenly sharp, painfully sharp. I remembered the chapel in Sicily, the one we cleared during Operation Husky, where we found that cellar with the stone walls carved in symbols none of us could translate. I remembered the bones, small ones, arranged in a circle, and the pendant, buried beneath dust and cloth that crumbled at the touch. I remember how I picked it up and something inside me shifted, tilted, like the floor had moved, but I was the only one who noticed. And I remembered the face of the priest we'd found upstairs, nailed to the altar with his mouth sewn shut. That was the first time I saw Claire. She was standing in the doorway, hair wet from the storm outside, watching us with those same eyes. No one else noticed. They walked right past her, talking about German troop movements and who'd get the next hot meal. But I saw her. And she saw me. Back in the clearing, the ground beneath her hand began to hum low steady, like a prayer spoken through earth. The stone where our names had been etched was glowing faintly now, each letter pulsing as if alive. Claire stood slowly, and for the first time she spoke. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. It threaded itself through the fog like a needle through cloth, precise and piercing. Not all who die fall. That was all. She turned and walked into the woods, and this time I didn't follow. I woke up in my foxhole just before dawn, my clothes damp, the pendant still in my pocket. No sign of fog, no clearing. Ramirez was already up, sipping cold coffee from a tin and muttering about the smell of cordite drifting in from the east. Delaunay was cleaning his rifle, eyes twitching like he hadn't slept at all. Curtis was nowhere to be seen. I asked, but no one had seen him since the previous night. We searched the perimeter, then the ruins near the ridge. Nothing. No blood. No gear. Just boom. Command rolled in by midday with new orders. Push into St. Lo. Secure the eastern quarter. Take out what was left of the machine gun nests near the church and link up with a British unit on the far side of the square. The final push, they called it. Break the Germans here, and we could finally push south, into the open fields beyond the hedgerows. We moved fast, too fast maybe, adrenaline making decisions where reason should have been. We were halfway down the slope when the first shell hit. It caught the lead vehicle, flipped it onto its side, turned the gunner into red mist and shattered the road like glass. Screams, chaos, smoke. We scrambled for cover, returning fire without even seeing where it came from. Somewhere up near the church tower, muzzle flashes blinked in and out like angry stars. Delaunay took one to the throat while pulling a wounded kid behind a cart. Ramirez dragged him halfway to safety before collapsing on top of him, both of them still, like the war had hit pause. I don't know how I made it to the archway near the square. Just remember running, falling, crawling over stones slick with blood and mud, the sounds of metal and screams twisting together into a single terrible music. And then silence again. Not full but dense. The kind of silence that fills your ears after an explosion, when your body's still catching up to the fact that you're alive. I pushed through a broken door, into what was once a bakery. Flowers still coated the floor. A loaf of bread, untouched, sat on the counter, hardened into a stone relic. There were pictures on the wall, smiling families, weddings, soldiers in old uniforms, the kind with buttons too bright and boots polished to a shine. I looked at one closely. My breath caught. It was me. Or someone who looked just like me. Standing in front of the same chapel in Sicily. Only the date was wrong. The year was 1914. That's when I understood. This war was not the first to pass through this land, and we were not the first to carry these names. We had worn these faces before, walked these fields, bled into this soil. And we would again. Because war doesn't forget. And neither does she.